Walmart just quietly cancelled orders for 12 foods, and they're not telling anyone. Not a press release, not a store notice, nothing. The only way you'll find out is by reaching for something you've bought for years and finding it's just gone. The shelf is still there. The aisle still looks full. But the specific product your family depends on has been removed from the ordering system without a single word. 12 foods already pulled back. Most people won't realize until the price of everything else starts climbing and the familiar options stop showing up. We're going through all 12 right now, starting from the least obvious and ending at number 1, which is something that affects the very first minutes of your day. And once you see what's happening to it, you won't be able to unsee it. Let's get into it. Number 12, breakfast cereal. Stand at the end of the cereal aisle and look down the row. Bright colors, familiar names, Cheerios, Frosted Flakes, Lucky Charms, Cinnamon Toast Crunch. From where you're standing, nothing looks wrong. That's the problem. The change isn't on the outside of the box, it's inside it. There's an industry term for what's happening here: shrinkflation. The price holds steady while the amount of food inside quietly decreases. The box might even stay the same height. The only way most people notice is when a box that used to last the full week runs out by Thursday. Not because anyone is eating more, because the box is delivering less. And something else is happening at the same time. Companies are quietly dropping varieties that no longer justify production costs. Flavors disappear. Standard sizes vanish from the ordering system without any notice. 1 week, the box is there. A few weeks later, the shelf slot holds something different or nothing at all. General Mills has publicly reported margin pressure and softer sales. Some Cheerios varieties have already been discontinued. As grain costs, sugar prices, packaging, and transportation all rise together, manufacturers concentrate on their fastest-moving products and quietly cut the rest. Boxes today run $4 to $6. Larger or premium sizes reach $5.50 to $8. The move is simple. Pick up 2 or 3 extra boxes of what your household actually eats when you find a good price. Store dry. Seal after opening. Check the price per ounce, not just the sticker, because in the cereal aisle, what you pay for and what you take home have quietly stopped being the same thing. Number 11. Canned tropical fruit. This one is easy to walk past. Most people do. Canned pineapple, mandarin oranges, fruit cocktail, peaches in syrup. Nobody builds a grocery trip around these. They go in the cart when a recipe calls for them, or when someone in the family always brings that one dish. Background items. And that's exactly what makes them worth paying attention to right now. Here's how retail contraction actually works. When a high-profile item disappears, ground beef, eggs, people notice immediately. But when a background item starts narrowing, nobody reacts, no panic, no headlines. The category just shrinks one variety at a time until the specific can you need simply isn't there. The familiar can of pineapple chunks isn't stocked as consistently as it was 2 years ago. Larger sizes disappear first. Mid-price brands get replaced by more expensive ones. A few varieties exit the assortment and never return. The shelf still looks stocked. The reliable option has quietly become unreliable. The pressure is real. Tropical fruit processing depends on international operations across Southeast Asia. Every can requires aluminum, and aluminum prices have risen substantially. Transportation costs layer on top. Right now, canned tropical fruit runs between 50 cents and 2 cents. If those pressures hold, the $2.50 to $4 range is where the math points next. Keep 4 to 8 cans of what your family uses in rotation. Pineapple, mandarin oranges, peaches, fruit cocktail. Rotate through them. This isn't stockpiling. It's keeping the flexibility to reach for the familiar thing before that shelf starts getting everyone's attention at the same time. Number 10. Frozen vegetables. Walk into the frozen aisle and look around. Cold, brightly lit, bags stacked floor to ceiling, broccoli, peas, carrots, green beans, stir-fry blends. This is one of the last aisles that still looks completely untouched, like it could never run short. Here's what most shoppers miss. The frozen aisle doesn't need empty shelves to signal a problem. It only needs fewer options each time you visit. Stop counting bags. Count choices. A vegetable that used to come in 3 bag sizes now comes in 1. A frozen medley that carried a budget version, a standard version, and an organic version now only stocks the most expensive one. Store-brand family-size bags, the ones that stretch across a full week of dinners, show up less consistently than they did 18 months ago. From the end of the aisle, the freezer still reads as full. From the shelf, the specific bag your family has bought for years simply isn't there. This isn't always a shortage. It's often a deliberate supplier decision. As ingredient costs, cold storage, labor, and transportation all rise together, processors focus on the highest margin products. Budget-friendly family bags get cut first. Premium organic stays on the shelf longer because those margins absorb the cost. USDA projections show fresh vegetable prices rising 7 to 8%. Frozen vegetables draw from many of the same growing regions. When yields drop in Florida or California, both fresh and frozen feel at the same time. Frozen vegetable bags currently run $2 to $3. If pressures continue, $3.50 to $5 for popular varieties is a realistic near-term trajectory. On each trip, add 1 or 2 extra bags of what your household actually uses. Variety over volume, the aisle looks full, the affordable choices are narrowing. And that gap is easier to close today than it will be 6 months from now. Number 9. Peanut butter. Something happens every single time beef prices rise. No advertising required, no announcement. It just happens automatically across every income level in every part of the country. The cart drifts toward the peanut butter aisle because peanut butter is one of the most efficient proteins in any grocery store. A sandwich, a spoonful alongside fruit, a fast breakfast with no cooking. One jar can replace a week's worth of more expensive protein at a fraction of the cost. And Walmart's inventory data is already reflecting that at scale. Family-sized jars sell out first. Natural and reduced sugar varieties disappear before standard ones. Smaller containers sit on the shelf longest, while the bulk formats that budget-conscious households depend on cycle through faster than restocking keeps up. When millions of households shift toward the same lower-cost protein simultaneously, demand rises faster than supply can respond. The peanut supply chain has limits. When enough families reach for the same shelf at the same moment, the economics change. A standard jar today runs $3 to $5. If demand keeps building alongside higher packaging and transportation costs, $5 is a realistic near-term outcome. But the price isn't the most important signal here. What matters more is the moment the specific jar your household buys disappears and comes back as a smaller version at the same price. That's when shrinkflation has fully arrived in your pantry. 2 backup jars, rotated first in, first out. Not out of fear, because your household will absolutely use them. When beef, eggs, and fresh protein all get expensive at the same time, and right now they are, peanut butter becomes the fallback for food budgets across the country. And when enough households arrive at the same fallback simultaneously, the cheapest protein on the shelf doesn't stay cheap for long. The quiet disappearance of these 12 staples from Walmart's ordering matrices is not an isolated retail anomaly. It is the direct consequence of a complex structural geographic trap compounded by specific corporate decisions made behind closed doors over the last 48 months. To understand why a container of cocoa or a specific brand of ground beef suddenly vanishes from the shelf without a press release, one must look at the mechanical underpinnings of modern supply chain logistics and the consolidation of American grocery distribution. The blueprint for what is currently occurring across retail locations was drawn decades ago. But the systemic breaking points were accelerated by economic triggers that reached a critical mass between 2024 and 2026. The primary catalyst relies on the extreme optimization of just-in-time inventory systems. Under this protocol, large-scale retailers like Walmart do not maintain vast backrooms filled with surplus goods. Instead, inventory levels are calculated by automated proprietary software that triggers regional distribution center dispatches based on real-time point-of-sale data. When an agricultural disruption occurs 3,000 miles away, the lag time between the crop failure and the physical shelf vacancy is measured in days, not months. The system is designed for maximum efficiency during times of geopolitical stability and predictable weather patterns. However, when consecutive climate events disrupt major shipping corridors, the efficiency mechanism transforms into a liability, forcing corporate procurement teams to unilaterally cancel order contracts to stabilize profit margins. Consider the geographic realities governing the olive oil and cocoa sectors. The global supply chain for olive oil is fundamentally trapped by Mediterranean topography. Spain, Italy, and Greece collectively account for the overwhelming majority of global production. The Andalusian region of Spain alone typically yields a significant percentage of the world's supply. However, official agricultural reports confirm that this specific corridor faced sustained, historic heat waves and unprecedented moisture deficits, starting in late 2024 and extending through the 2025 harvest cycle. The resulting crop yields dropped below 50% of historical averages. This geographical vulnerability created an immediate raw material deficit, because Walmart relies on high-volume, fixed-price contracts with international distributors. The sudden spike in spot market prices meant that keeping mid-tier olive oil varieties on the shelves at historical price points would result in a net loss per unit. Corporate logicians responded not by raising the price exponentially overnight, which triggers immediate consumer blowback, but by quietly removing the mid-priced options entirely. Leaving only high-margin premium brands or micro-sized bottles, a parallel structural failure occurred within the West African cocoa belt, primarily affecting Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, which together export roughly 70% of the global cocoa bean supply. Beginning in early 2025, an intersection of the El Niño weather phenomenon and widespread swollen shoot virus outbreaks decimated plantations. By the first quarter of 2026, international commodity exchanges recorded cocoa futures surging past historic thresholds, topping $12,000 per metric ton. For a massive retailer operating on razor-thin aggregate margins, these numbers altered the basic economics of the baking and confectionery aisles. The procurement division faced a stark choice: absorb the structural cost increase or aggressively streamline the inventory. Internal corporate directives led to the silent cancellation of orders for high-purity dark chocolate blocks and bulk baking cocoa powder. The shelf space was systematically reallocated to lower-cost, highly processed milk chocolate alternatives that utilize synthetic fillers and significantly less raw cocoa solids simultaneously. Domestic agricultural constraints have placed unprecedented pressure on the refrigeration and meat cases. The contraction of the United States cattle herd represents a multi-year biological trajectory that cannot be rectified by short-term corporate interventions. According to official data released by the National Agricultural Statistics Service, in January 2026, the domestic beef cow inventory dropped to its lowest numerical level in over 6 decades. This decline was triggered by prolonged droughts across the Great Plains and Western grazing territories between 2022 and 2025, which forced ranchers to liquidate their breeding herds due to escalating forage and water costs. The biological reality of cattle production dictates that rebuilding a herd requires a minimum of 3 years from calf selection to market maturity. Consequently, the volume of domestic processing operations plummeted throughout late 2025 and early 2026. Faced with a shrinking aggregate supply of domestic utility beef, large-scale buyers began competing fiercely for imported volumes from Australia and South America. When international logistics, costs, and customs bottlenecks delayed these imports, the automated system at major fulfillment hubs simply started registering zero balances for standard ground beef packages, leading to the discrete regional order cancellations that warehouse coordinators are currently documenting. The domestic poultry sector has been subject to a similar, unrelenting external pressure. The highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak, which initial reports suggested would be a temporary seasonal disruption, transformed into an endemic operational hazard across major commercial egg-laying facilities in the Midwest. Between 2024 and the current months of 2026, recurrent biosecurity breaches forced the mandatory destruction of tens of millions of commercial birds. Every time a facility is flagged, the entire localized population must be culled to prevent regional, stopping production instantly. The direct consequence on corporate procurement is immediate volatility. When a primary supplier loses its flock, it defaults on its volume commitments to major retailers. Instead of sourcing expensive replacement cartons from the open market to fill every shelf space, corporate management chose to quietly trim the ordering options. The lower margin, high-volume 18-count cartons and specific regional budget brands were systematically deleted from the active distribution ledger to prioritize the remaining supply for higher-margin organic and specialty segments. This systemic thinning of Optio across all 12 categories is driven by a definitive corporate objective: preserving the gross margin percentage demanded by institutional investors. When inflation spikes across energy, labor, packaging, aluminum, and maritime freight, a retail corporation can either pass the entire cost directly to the consumer, risking a rapid drop in foot traffic, or it can execute a silent inventory curation. By removing the products that have become structurally unprofitable due to geographic and environmental traps, the store maintains the illusion of abundance while fundamentally reducing the consumer's ability to choose affordable staples. The shelves remain meticulously faced and organized, but the variety is engineered to extract maximum profit per square foot from a restricted supply chain. The current operational reality within Walmart's sprawling distribution network reveals a sharp systemic conflict between corporate efficiency models and shifting market dynamics. Internal logistics reports from the second quarter of 2026 indicate that the tension between regional management and corporate procurement has reached an all-time high. At the center of this dispute is the automated global replenishment system, an artificial intelligence matrix designed to optimize stock levels. When global supply chain anomalies occur, this system automatically flags low-margin items for order cancellation, without requiring human verification. Local store managers are left to contend with the immediate fallout, forced to rearrange entire aisles to hide the sudden absence of core grocery products while dealing with an increasingly frustrated consumer base. This friction is most visible in the center aisles of the store, where the clash between consumer purchasing power and corporate margin targets is playing out in real time. For example, the quiet cancellation of contract orders for family-sized peanut butter jars stems directly from an internal directive to prioritize high-margin specialty spreads. As inflation eroded the average household's disposable income over the past 2 years, the demand for affordable proteins surged. Internal sales data from early 2026 showed an unprecedented 40% spike in baseline peanut butter sales across the lower 3 income demographics. However, instead of expanding supply chains to meet this demand, procurement officials faced escalating costs for food-grade plastic packaging and domestic truck freight. Because the profit margin on a standard 40-ounce store brand jar is less than 3%, corporate management opted to restrict allocations, shifting processing capacity towards smaller, premium natural and flavored varieties that command a profit margin upwards of 15%. The struggle extends deeply into the frozen and canned food sections, where domestic suppliers are actively rebelling against fixed-price procurement contracts. Throughout late 2025 and into the current months of 2026, major agricultural processors in California's Central Valley and the Pacific Northwest faced skyrocketing industry electricity rates and increased mandatory labor costs. When these processors attempted to renegotiate their wholesale supply agreements with Walmart to reflect these higher operational expenses, corporate procurement held a rigid line, refusing to accept cost increases on entry-level frozen vegetables and canned seafood. The resulting deadlock led to immediate supply stoppages. Suppliers simply diverted their remaining inventories to regional grocery chains, willing to pay higher wholesale rates, leaving Walmart's automated system with no choice but to cancel the outstanding purchase orders. This explains why standard budget-friendly bags of frozen peas and mixed vegetables have vanished, replaced entirely by organic name brands whose higher retail prices absorb the suppliers' increased costs. The aluminum supply crisis has introduced another layer of conflict, directly impacting the canned tuna and tropical fruit segments. Industrial manufacturing data from 2026 confirms that global aluminum production costs have remained highly volatile due to energy constraints in refining hubs. For canned seafood processors, the metal container now accounts for a larger percentage of the total production cost than the actual fish inside. When import logistics fees for Southeast Asian tuna shipments increased due to rising maritime insurance premiums, the economic viability of the standard 5-ounce can dissolved. Rather than allowing retail prices to cross a psychological threshold that would deter shoppers entirely, corporate planners implemented a quiet pullback. Procurement files show that multiple regional contracts for mid-grade chunk light tuna were terminated, thinning the category to create a forced choice between ultra-cheap, generic options of lower quality and expensive. Imported solid white albacore. A major clash is also unfolding within the dairy and beverage sectors, where regional supply chains are breaking down under the weight of localized regulatory shifts and transportation bottlenecks. Independent dairy cooperatives across the Northeast and Upper Midwest have reported severe shortages of long-haul refrigerated transport drivers in 2026. This logistical constraint has made the transport of highly perishable liquids like fresh milk and heavy cream increasingly expensive. Walmart's distribution centers operate on strict delivery windows. A delay of even 2 hours results in automatic financial penalties for the supplier. In response to these rigid penalties and rising diesel costs, several major dairy cooperatives altered their distribution routes, cutting out delivery runs to distant fulfillment hubs. To keep the dairy cases looking full, corporate buyers expanded agreements with mega dairy conglomerates that rely heavily on ultra-pasteurized products and synthetic creamers, which boast a much longer shelf life but offer far fewer options for the end consumer. The reality on the ground is an analytical dead end. The strategy of quiet inventory contraction has successfully protected the corporation's short-term financial sheets, as evidenced by recent quarterly earnings reports showing stable gross profits. However, it has fundamentally broken the unwritten contract between the mega retailer and the American shopper, the promise of predictable, comprehensive availability. Retail industry analysts note that this is the first time in modern marketing history that a dominant retail entity has responded to supply chain pressure, not through price increases alone, but through the deliberate engineering of scarcity across essential food groups. As the system continues to purge less profitable stock-keeping units, the gap between what the consumer expects to find and what actually sits on the shelf continues to widen, setting the stage for an unprecedented shift in consumer behavior over the coming months.